If you're sick of the mainstream sports outlets, well, so was I. So I started my own show. I'm Shane Larson, and this is the Game Time Guru. It's different than other talk shows. I'm providing a panoramic view on sports so you can see them through a different lens. So buckle up and let's go. What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Game Time Guru podcast. Today we're diving into the mixed martial arts industry again. We've had 3 fighters on the show in the past. We had Matt Jones, we had Brendan Raftery, we had Kyle Islami on the show, but now we're going to be talking to somebody else in the mixed martial arts industry, the guy who puts all the fights together, and that's a licensed matchmaker. You're going to learn a lot today on this episode. We're going to learn the ins and outs of his job, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything that goes into matchmaking for these mixed martial arts promotions that go on. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Todd Carlson onto the show. Todd, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Todd. And can you break down what you do, who you are, in a little bit more detail than what I said in the introduction?
Sure. So I am the licensed matchmaker for the promotion Front Street Fights at CenturyLink Arena, downtown Boise. And I also, when Bellator comes to town, they hire me to matchmake and put together their preliminary card.
Sweet deal. Okay, so did you have any experience in mixed martial arts with this whole licensed matchmaking before you started doing it for Front Street Fights here in Boise?
Well, not a whole bunch. I did a couple of shows with a previous employer over at the Idaho Center in Nampa, a huge venue, and then a couple smaller shows on site at a company location. So, kind of got started by hiring some people to put together a show for us. And then eventually over a couple of years' time, I kind of watched and studied and saw how they did it and just kind of figured out, hey, I think I can maybe do this myself.
Well, I think you did a good job, man, because you took what you learned and you implemented it into this structure for this specific promotion. I've been following Front Street Fights since it began, and I think it's amazing. You've put some amazing fights together, so you obviously know what you're doing, and that's why I wanted to bring you on the show. Can you explain to us, though, for the listeners that don't know, how long has this promotion of Front Street Fights been going on?
We are just finishing our 5th year, I believe. So, I think May will be 5 years.
5 years, man. That's pretty good. And it's probably going to continue to grow. And I guess we'll ask you that a little bit later. But in regards to getting people there, I mean, a big part of keeping a business like this, a promotion like this going is getting people to buy tickets and continue to support it. What do you do to put together these matches, to draw these fans, to draw everybody there? Like, how do you put together a perfect match, so to speak?
Right. Well, when we first got started, really the whole idea behind the project was to create a platform and basically a direction for the local fighters to perform here locally, grow, get experience, and then give them exposure to bigger shows, and obviously create a pathway for them to move past us. So, to answer your question, a good matchup, it's easier. It's kind of hard to explain, but, we do have a set of kind of criteria that you've got. If you're going to be a pro fighter on our show at Front Street Fights, in my head, at least as a matchmaker, I've got to look at you as a pro fighter and say, okay, you are talented enough and you're doing the things you should be doing every day, from training to the nutrition to how you market and brand yourself. That you're doing everything that you should be doing in order to reach that next level. If you're not already doing those things and in process with those things as a pro, then I'm not interested. So if you're just a tough guy that used to fight 10 years ago and, maybe now bounces somewhere and, you hit me up and, hey, I want a pro fight on your show, that's just not the caliber of fighter we're looking for. So when first you raise the bar as to the talent level, and then you put 2 really talented fighters together that are similar records, and it's an interesting matchup, then it usually turns out to be a great fight.
For sure, and I think it's awesome that you've raised the bar, because the fact that you've raised the bar for the fighters, it might eliminate some of the pool that you can choose from, but it also allows you to spotlight those better fighters who take it more seriously, and the fans come. And I can speak for myself. I can tell you right now, like, I enjoy going to Front Street Fights and watching the fights. I enjoy it. I think the fighters are great, and that just completely it shows. And I think that makes more sense now that you just said all of that, because you have raised the bar. I can tell from the quality of fights that I've seen. Now, obviously, that's the good stuff. I want to hear about some of the most difficult parts and the toughest part about your job.
Well, obviously, late injuries absolutely drive me insane, which is nobody's fault. But, a week or two before the fight, somebody gets injured, which happens, but it just absolutely throws everything into a stress tailspin, trying to come up with last-minute fights or fighters. And, that's tough. It's also, we're really trying to figure out ways where we can grow the amateur prospects around the area to fill in with the pros, because some of these pros are getting signed to bigger organizations, and we're just flat losing them, or they're moving away. So as they grow and go on to bigger organizations, my stable of pro fighters is smaller. So the biggest thing that we have a hard time with is growing fighters and having enough fighters in the stable to fill cards.
Yeah, and I can imagine that it would be pretty difficult. I mean, it's similar to like the NBA and the NBA G League. You have this G League team that's really good, and then a couple people get pulled up to the NBA. You lose your talented players, and you have to deal with that. Same thing as like minor league baseball. You get the guys called up to the majors, you lose the talent there, and so the pool, is a little bit harder to choose from. But I do think that the fighters in the Valley, even the amateurs, like Kyle Islami, who was on my show a couple months ago, great fighter, great skill set. He's going to be a great pro if he continues to work on his craft. So you do have a good pool of amateurs. I think that speaks volumes for the gyms that are around here, that are training facilities here in the Valley. Do you think you have a pretty good relationship with most of the gyms here, as well as, I guess, across the region?
Yeah, I like to think so. We've only got a small handful of them actually here locally in the Treasure Valley that are really invested in MMA. There's a lot of, karate studios and different things like that, but there's really only a handful of real true MMA gyms in the Valley. So I think years ago when they would let anybody fight around here, I think there's a lot more gyms. But yeah, I think we've got a pretty good relationship. Business 101, you do what you say what you say you're going to do, and you hold up your end of the deal and the bargains and the things that you put together. And then the out-of-state camps, I've got some real good connections now, some out-of-state camps in Portland, Seattle, Salt Lake, even into Montana. There's some really talented fighters up in Montana that we grab a hold of sometimes.
Absolutely. And Todd, I know that you've put some great fights together. I'm wondering, though, what is the biggest perk, or is that the biggest perk when you see like a great fight that you've put together, that you've basically created the perfect match? Or just maybe talk about some of the perks or the benefits of your job and what you love about it.
I get really, so obviously I'm a fan of the sport, but, during the Front Street Fights events, I usually sit in cage side, and it's really exciting for me to have somebody on the card that I've worked with for maybe the last 2 or 3 years, that they're doing all the right things, good things are happening for the fighter, and they get in the cage. I mean, there's a handful of guys, Vince Morales is one of them. Actually, Kyle Frost does it. A couple of these guys that have been with me for quite a while, they'll get in the cage before the fight and they're making introductions and stuff, and they'll kind of look at me and smile like, here we go. And I get excited for them because, again, they've got to close the deal. They've got to perform that night under the bright lights and thousands of people watching them. It's all up to them. But the rewarding part, I think, for all of us at Front Street Fights is when we get somebody in the cage and they succeed. And, and it helps their career. That's what we enjoy. For sure.
And I have a question for you, and I'm sure the listeners want to know this as well. As a matchmaker, I'm sure, money goes into it, paying out the fighters if they're professionals. But at this lower tier, fighting scale, it's not on the biggest platforms such as Bellator and the UFC. Is Front Street Fights one of the higher paying ones or anything like that? I guess you don't have to go into detail as far as money, but just a simple yes or no, like, does Front Street Fights pay pretty well for these fighters?
No. I think at this level, the fighters at any of the levels below Bellator or the UFC, the problem is with our show, if you've been to our show, it's an expensive show to put on. That arena is very expensive. All the staff and people, security, vendors, everything that goes into production, TV production, there's, TV crew there. There's live stream for free, trying to, promote the fighter and the brand. It's a very expensive production to put on. So I would say we're on par or maybe slightly above other mid-major promotions as far as pay goes. But, one of the reasons why we're still in business at this point is we haven't overpaid yet. And, a lot of the fighters, I want to pay them fairly, and a lot of them understand that at this level, it's almost like playing AAA baseball. You're pro, you're getting paid, but you haven't made it to the show yet. So, as the crowds grow and we get more and more people buying tickets, then we can afford to pay more. But, it also brings in promotions just like this weekend with Bellator coming to town. Everybody on that card is probably, on that undercard, is getting paid more than we would pay them. So it's created those opportunities for them too. So
for sure. Now, to my understanding, Todd, jumping to this next subject is, Bellator's coming this weekend, and you, like you said, you helped put the preliminary fights together for that. And this is, to my understanding, your second time working with them. Do you enjoy working with the higher platforms, like the higher organizations, or is it kind of a high stress load for you, or both, I should say?
It's both, because you want to, as you're doing an undercard or a prelim card, you want to put out a real high-end product for them. So when they get here, that their prelims are really entertaining. They're good fights, good crowd. But Bellator is a fantastic organization to work for. The UFC was the same way when they were here, a couple months ago. The people that work behind the scenes at those organizations are true professionals. And they're smart. They don't hire dumb people at those big corporations. So they're super professional to work with, super friendly. Bellator, they're all rolling into town today, as a matter of fact. They're Matchmaker. And I enjoy working with them a lot.
I bet you do, man. And I think it's cool that you're rewarded with that opportunity because and I say rewarded because you've put in hard work. You've put in great work, good quality work, because, Front Street Fights, it's a great promotion. You got great fights that you always put together. So it's cool to see that you have that opportunity and you get to be around people in the industry from, that platform. And I have a question for you, Todd. Where do you see Front Street Fights going, though? I want to know about that. Like, it's already lasted 5 years, and what's the ultimate goal with Front Street Fights moving forward for you guys?
That's a good question. One, with Front Street Fights, I think, we've had from day one, we had some goals. One of the goals was to get the UFC to come to Boise. And so you had to build a fan base here in Boise that the UFC felt good about coming to our town and putting on a show. So we did that. We've had Bellator here a couple times. We had RFA here once. And I think probably, our one of our biggest goals is let's figure out how with our own local fighters and fan base to sell out that arena for every show. And then, if you do that, then you can afford to pay guys more. There's more sponsorship available. There's more exposure for everybody. So yeah, I think we keep rolling with what we're doing. Same business model. Just keep growing these fighters and creating opportunities for them.
And Todd, do you think that you see yourself staying here with Front Street Fights, or if you were presented with the opportunity to work for a bigger platform full time, a bigger organization full time as a matchmaker like you are right now, would you take it? I just want to know, what's your plans?
Yeah, I never say never, but I'm from Meridian. I live here now. I've got kids and a wife, and I definitely wouldn't move anywhere else. So if another organization needed help matchmaking an event or needed somebody to help them remotely, I'd sure be open to doing that. But I don't plan on making any major changes.
Well, hey, we wouldn't be too upset if you stayed here, Todd, because you've been doing a great job, growing this mixed martial arts fan base here in the Treasure Valley. So we would be happy if you stayed here. Either way, we're rooting for you, and I appreciate you joining us and sharing that information with us today, Todd.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Todd Carlson. He's the licensed matchmaker for Front Street Fights here in the Boise area. The Treasure Valley is what we call it. So if you're from Boise, or if you just like mixed martial arts, any of the listeners that are across the country, across the world, if you like mixed martial arts, check it out. Go find Front Street Fights on YouTube. Find it on Facebook. Give them a like. Follow them. Show some support. If you're a mixed martial arts fan, show some support for these local fighters that are here. And if you haven't been to one of the events for Front Street Fights, the next time they come around, if you follow them on their social media platforms and you follow them where they're at, you'll know when the fights are coming up. go check it out. It's worth the money. It's worth it to go check it out and support these local fighters, the hard work that goes into it. You got to hear from Todd. He puts together the events, but like you said, there's a lot of money that goes into it. They take this very seriously. So it's not just a rinky-dink setup for these fighters. The venue is really cool for CenturyLink Arena. It's a really cool venue, and they do a great job putting the fights together and putting the entire event together so that the fans stay, pretty much entertained the entire time from the time they go through the doors, sit down, and then the time they leave. So also make sure you're checking out Bellator 205, which is the fights that, the preliminary round, the preliminary fights are what Todd put together. So make sure to check that out. It's going to be a great card. Really exciting for the fighters here. We got some local guys that are fighting. So if you don't make it live and you don't get to see it live, make sure you check it out later. Bellator 205. Check out the prelims to see Todd's work in making those matches happen. Appreciate you guys tuning in, listening to another episode of the Game Time Guru podcast. And you guys know the drill. Subscribe, and we'll talk to you next week. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of my show. Now, if you could go and do me a favor, head over to iTunes, give me 5 stars, and leave me a review. It would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your support.